Sarah Martinez never thought she would miss the weight of tactical gear on her shoulders. But as she stood in her civilian apartment 5 years after leaving the Navy SEALs, she found herself touching the empty space where her duty belt used to rest. The morning sun filtered through her kitchen window, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where she sat with her laptop, reviewing security contracts for corporate clients. At 38, Sarah had successfully transitioned from one of the most elite military units in the world to running her own private security consulting firm. Her clients included Fortune 500 companies, wealthy executives, and government contractors who needed someone with her unique skill set to assess vulnerabilities and design protection protocols. The work paid well, certainly better than her military salary ever had, but something was missing. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in years, but one that was burned into her memory. Commander James Harrison, her former commanding officer, had been like a father to her during her 8 years with the SEALs. He had recruited her personally after she distinguished herself in Marine Force reconnaissance, recognizing potential that even Sarah hadn't known she possessed. "Martinez," she answered, using the crisp tone that had become second nature during her military years. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Can you meet me at the old place in 2 hours?" Harrison's voice carried the same authority it always had, but there was something else there now. Urgency, maybe even concern. The old place was a coffee shop near the naval base where they used to debrief after particularly challenging operations. Sarah had avoided that area of town since her retirement, finding it too difficult to drive past the gates where she had spent the most intense and meaningful years of her life. But Harrison wouldn't have called unless it was important. As she drove toward the meeting, memories flooded back. The grueling selection process that had nearly broken her both physically and mentally. The first time she had proven herself to skeptical teammates who wondered if a woman could handle the demands of their missions. The countless hours of training in everything from underwater demolitions to hostage rescue techniques. The operations she couldn't discuss with anyone outside the community. Missions that had taken her to places that didn't officially exist on any map. Sarah had excelled in ways that surprised even her instructors. Her specialty had become high-risk extractions and intelligence gathering in hostile territory. She possessed an unusual combination of physical capability and intellectual analysis that made her invaluable for complex operations where split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The decision to leave hadn't been easy. After 8 years, her body was beginning to show the wear of constant training and deployment. She had seen too many older operators struggle with injuries that never fully healed, watched marriages crumble under the strain of secrets and absences. When a private security firm offered her a position at 3 times her military salary, it seemed like the right time to transition to civilian life. Her retirement ceremony had been small but meaningful. Harrison had presented her with a flag and a letter of commendation that praised her exceptional service in defense of national security interests. The generic language couldn't capture the reality of what she had accomplished, but she understood the need for discretion. The coffee shop looked exactly the same as she remembered. Harrison was already there, sitting at their usual corner table with his back to the wall and a clear view of all entrances. Old habits died hard in their line of work. He looked older than she remembered, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the same confident bearing that had inspired her trust all those years ago. "You look good, Sarah. Civilian life treating you well?" He stood to embrace her, and she was surprised by how much she had missed the easy camaraderie of military relationships. "Can't complain. Business is steady and I sleep in my own bed most nights. What about you? Still terrorizing new recruits?" She settled into her chair, noting automatically that Harrison had chosen a table that gave them privacy for sensitive conversation. Harrison's expression grew serious. "Actually, that's why I called. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to understand that this conversation never happened." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she used to get when receiving mission briefings for particularly dangerous operations. "I'm listening." 3 weeks ago, we lost contact with a team conducting a classified operation in Southeast Asia. The official story is that they're investigating terrorist financing networks, but the reality is more complicated. Harrison paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. They were tracking down stolen military technology that could pose a significant threat to national security if it falls into the wrong hands. How significant? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The kind that could change the balance of power in that region permanently. The kind that could put American forces at serious disadvantage if our enemies figure out how to use it. Harrison leaned forward slightly. The team leader was Captain David Chen. I believe you worked with him on Operation Silent Thunder. Sarah remembered Chen well. He had been one of the few operators who had never questioned her abilities, or made her feel like she had to prove herself twice as hard as her male counterparts. He was also one of the most capable and careful team leaders she had ever served under. If he had gone dark, something had gone seriously wrong. When you say lost contact, what exactly do you mean? Sarah asked. Complete communication blackout. They missed their last 3 scheduled check-ins. Their last known position was near the border between Thailand and Myanmar, in an area controlled by various militia groups and criminal organizations. The terrain is nearly impossible for large-scale rescue operations, and we can't risk sending in another team without better intelligence about what happened to the first one. Sarah began to understand why Harrison had called her. The region he was describing was one she knew well from previous operations. The complex political situation, the difficult terrain, and the need for someone who could operate independently all pointed to a very specific type of mission. Jim, I've been out for 5 years. My security clearance has been downgraded, and I'm not even sure I remember all the protocols anymore. She was trying to convince herself as much as him. Sarah, you know that area better than anyone currently on active duty. You speak the languages, you understand the local power structures, and you have contacts that could be invaluable for this type of operation. Harrison's voice took on the persuasive tone she remembered from mission briefings. We're not talking about a full reactivation. This would be a consultant position, temporary duty only. The offer hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah found herself thinking about Chen and his team, probably trapped or worse in hostile territory, while bureaucrats in Washington debated the political implications of a rescue mission. She thought about the technology Harrison had mentioned, and what it might mean if it ended up in the hands of people who wanted to harm American interests. Most of all, she thought about the part of herself that had never quite adjusted to civilian life, the part that missed the clarity of purpose that came with serving something larger than personal profit. Tell me more about the mission parameters, she heard herself saying, and knew that her quiet retirement was about to come to an end. The classified briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command felt both familiar and foreign to Sarah, as she sat across from Harrison and 2 other officers she didn't recognize. The walls were covered with maps, satellite photos, and operational charts that brought back memories of countless mission planning sessions. The smell of strong coffee and the hum of secure communication equipment created an atmosphere of focused intensity that she had missed more than she cared to admit. Before we begin, I need you to sign these documents, Harrison said, sliding a folder across the table. Temporary security clearance reinstatement, consultant agreement, and a non-disclosure agreement that covers everything we're about to discuss. Sarah reviewed the paperwork carefully. The consultant agreement offered compensation that was generous even by private sector standards, but she noticed several clauses that essentially gave the military broad authority over her actions during the assignment. The NDA was comprehensive enough to ensure that she could never discuss any aspect of the operation, even decades in the future. This is pretty restrictive language. Jim, what exactly am I getting myself into? She asked. Something that officially doesn't exist, replied the woman sitting to Harrison's left. She was introduced as Colonel Rebecca Torres, Intelligence Liaison. The technology that was stolen represents 5 years of advanced research and development. If it's reverse engineered by hostile forces, it could neutralize many of our current operational advantages. The second officer, Major Frank Williams from Special Operations Planning, opened a laptop and projected images onto the wall screen. Captain Chen's team was tracking the technology to a compound in the Golden Triangle region. This area is controlled by a criminal organization led by a man named Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian Special Forces officer who's been running guns and drugs through Southeast Asia for the past decade. Sarah studied the satellite images of dense jungle terrain broken by rivers and small clearings. The compound appeared to be well fortified, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls and what looked like guard towers. How did stolen American military technology end up with a Russian arms dealer in the middle of nowhere? That's what Chen's team was trying to determine, Torres answered. Intelligence suggests the theft was an inside job, someone with high-level access who knew exactly what to take and how to get it out of the country undetected. Kozlov was probably just the buyer, but he might be our only lead to whoever orchestrated the theft. Williams clicked to the next image, showing personnel files for Chen's 4-person team. Sarah recognized 2 of the other operators from previous missions. All were experienced professionals who wouldn't have been captured easily. Their last communication indicated they had located the compound and were beginning surveillance. That was 18 days ago. 18 days is a long time in hostile territory, Sarah observed. What makes you think they're still alive? Kozlov's organization has a history of taking prisoners for interrogation and potential prisoner exchanges, Harrison explained. They're business people first, and live Americans are more valuable than dead ones. But that protection won't last forever, especially if they think a rescue operation is imminent. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the information. The mission parameters were becoming clear, and they weren't encouraging. So you want me to infiltrate a heavily guarded compound in hostile territory, locate and extract 4 prisoners, and somehow recover stolen military technology, all while operating alone in an area where I'll have no backup if things go wrong. That's an oversimplification, but essentially accurate, Torres replied. However, you wouldn't be completely alone. We have assets in the region who can provide limited support, and we've identified a local contact who might be able to help you get close to the compound. Williams pulled up another file. Dr. Elena Vasquez, medical relief worker with Doctors Without Borders. She's been operating in the region for 3 years and has established relationships with various local groups, including some who have dealings with Kozlov's organization. She's agreed to provide cover for your insertion. Sarah studied the photograph of a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and sun-weathered skin. Does she know what she's really agreeing to help with? She knows enough, Harrison said carefully. Dr. Vasquez has been frustrated by the lack of response to reports about human trafficking and forced labor in the region. She believes you're investigating those activities for an international human rights organization, so I'm going in under false pretenses with a civilian who doesn't understand the real dangers involved. Sarah felt a familiar nod of concern in her stomach. Involving unknowing civilians in military operations always complicated matters exponentially. It's not ideal, but it's the best cover we can arrange on short notice, Torres admitted. The region is too unstable for normal diplomatic or military channels, and Kozlov's people are suspicious of anyone who seems too professional or well-equipped. Sarah stood and walked to the wall map, tracing the border regions with her finger. She remembered the area from previous operations. The dense jungle that could hide entire armies, the river systems that provided the only reliable transportation routes, and the complex web of loyalties among local tribes and criminal organizations. What about extraction? If I manage to locate the team and the technology, how do I get everyone out? She asked. There's a landing zone here. Williams pointed to a clearing about 20 kilometers from the compound. We'll have a helicopter on standby across the border in Thailand. But you'll need to get the team to the LZ and signal for pickup. 20 kilometers through hostile territory with 4 potentially injured prisoners and stolen technology. That probably weighs a significant amount. Sarah turned back to face the group. This mission has a very low probability of success, and you all know it. Harrison met her gaze steadily. We know. But Chen and his team volunteered for this assignment knowing the risks, just like you're volunteering now. And the alternative is allowing technology that could be used against American forces worldwide to remain in enemy hands. Sarah appreciated his honesty. Military operations always involved calculated risks, and this one was admittedly on the high end of the risk spectrum. But she had undertaken difficult missions before, and she understood the importance of the larger strategic picture. What's my timeline? She asked. Dr. Vasquez is expecting you in Bangkok tomorrow evening. She's arranged for you to accompany her on a medical supply run into the border region, which will get you within operational distance of the target area. Torres handed her another folder. Your cover identity, travel documents, and initial equipment list are in here. Sarah opened the folder and reviewed her new identity. Maria Santos, freelance journalist investigating human rights violations. The cover was simple enough to maintain, but sophisticated enough to explain her presence in dangerous areas. How long do I have once I'm in country? Chen's team has been missing for 18 days. Intelligence estimates suggest that prisoners in Kozlov's custody typically aren't kept alive longer than 30 days unless they have significant value for ongoing interrogation. William's tone was matter-of-fact, but Sarah heard the underlying urgency. That gives you approximately 12 days to locate them and execute extraction. 12 days to infiltrate a criminal organization, locate 4 missing operators, recover classified technology, and execute a successful extraction without backup or official support. Sarah had faced challenging odds before, but this mission pushed the boundaries of what was realistically achievable. I'll need specialized equipment that won't be available through normal supply channels, she said. Already arranged. There's a secure storage facility in Bangkok where you can access whatever you need. The contact information is in your packet. Harrison stood, signaling that the briefing was concluding. Sarah, I want you to understand that if this operation goes wrong, official channels will disavow any knowledge of your activities. You'll be completely on your own. Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. Deniability was essential for operations that skirted international law and diplomatic protocols. When do I leave? Your flight to Bangkok departs in 6 hours. Dr. Vasquez will meet you at the airport tomorrow evening. Torres closed her laptop and gathered her files. Any other questions? Sarah looked around the room one more time, memorizing details that might be important later. The familiar weight of responsibility was settling on her shoulders again, along with the sharp focus that came with dangerous missions. She thought about Chen and his team, probably wondering if anyone was coming for them, and about the technology that could endanger countless American service members if it remained in hostile hands. Just one, she said finally. What aren't you telling me about this operation? The humidity of Bangkok hit Sarah like a wall as she stepped off the airplane, even at 10 o'clock in the evening. The familiar sounds and smells of Southeast Asia brought back memories of previous deployments, both welcome and troubling. She had spent enough time in this part of the world to know that beneath the vibrant street, life and bustling commerce lay currents of danger that could turn deadly without warning. Dr. Elena Vasquez was waiting at the international arrivals gate, holding a small sign with Maria Santos written in neat handwriting. She was smaller than Sarah had expected from her photographs, but carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to working in challenging environments. Her medical bag and practical clothing marked her as a professional rather than a tourist. Maria, I'm Elena. Welcome to Bangkok. Her handshake was firm and her English carried only a slight accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. How was your flight? Long but uneventful. Thank you for agreeing to help with my research. Sarah fell into step beside Elena as they walked toward the exit. I know this isn't exactly typical for medical relief workers. Human rights and public health are more connected than most people realize. Elena replied as they approached a battered pickup truck in the parking area. The situations I encounter in the border regions often involve both medical emergencies and human rights violations. Having someone document these issues could help bring international attention to problems that are often ignored. As they drove through the late-night traffic of Bangkok, Elena explained their planned route into the border region. They would drive to a town called Mae Hong Son, then use Elena's established connections to cross into Myanmar at an unofficial border crossing used primarily by refugees and medical workers. From there, they would travel by boat along river systems that provided access to remote villages where Elena conducted medical clinics. The area we're going to is technically controlled by the Myanmar military, but in practice it's run by various ethnic groups and criminal organizations, Elena explained as they navigated through a maze of street vendors and motorbikes. The situation is complicated and alliances change frequently based on business interests and personal relationships. Sarah listened carefully, filing away information that might be crucial later. Elena's knowledge of local politics and personalities would be invaluable for understanding the environment around Kozlov's compound. Have you ever encountered Russian or European criminal organizations in the area? Unfortunately, yes. There's a group that operates from a compound about 50 kilometers north of where we'll be working. They're involved in various illegal activities, but the local authorities either can't or won't take action against them. Elena's expression darkened. We've treated people who were clearly victims of human trafficking, but they're too frightened to talk about who held them or how they escaped. This confirmed Sarah's suspicion that Kozlov's organization was involved in more than just arms dealing. Human trafficking operations often served as cover for other criminal activities and provided a steady source of income for maintaining large security forces. It also meant that the compound would be heavily guarded and that prisoners would be closely monitored. They reached Elena's apartment near the medical district, a modest but comfortable space filled with medical supplies and research materials. Elena had prepared a small guest room for Sarah, complete with maps of the border region and background information about the ethnic groups and political situations they would encounter. I've arranged for us to leave tomorrow afternoon, Elena said as she showed Sarah around the apartment. That will put us at the border crossing around midnight, which is the safest time to avoid both military patrols and bandits. Sarah spent the evening reviewing Elena's materials and cross-referencing them with the intelligence information she had received from Harrison's team. The satellite photos and local maps painted a picture of extremely challenging terrain, with dense jungle broken by rivers and mountain ranges that could hide large numbers of hostile forces. The secure storage facility Harrison had mentioned was located in an industrial district across the city. Sarah took a taxi there early the next morning, using a code phrase to identify herself to the facility manager. The equipment cache exceeded her expectations: night vision gear, communications equipment, weapons, and specialized tools for infiltration and extraction operations. Most importantly, there were medical supplies and emergency rations that would be essential if she needed to sustain rescued prisoners during a long extraction journey. Sarah selected items that could be concealed in medical supply containers or disguised as journalistic equipment, aware that everything she carried would need to pass inspection by various border guards and local authorities. The weapons selection required careful consideration. She needed firepower that would be effective against multiple opponents, but light enough for extended carry through difficult terrain. She chose a compact assault rifle that could be disassembled and hidden in equipment cases, along with ammunition, grenades, and a silenced pistol for close quarters work. Communication equipment was equally critical. Sarah selected a satellite communication device that could reach emergency frequencies monitored by American forces, along with short-range radios that could be used to coordinate with rescued team members. The equipment was designed to look like standard journalist gear if examined by hostile forces. Returning to Elena's apartment, Sarah carefully packed her equipment into medical supply containers and journalist equipment cases. Elena noticed her careful attention to weight distribution and protective padding, but didn't ask questions about items that clearly weren't standard journalism supplies. You seem very experienced with this type of travel, Elena observed as they loaded the pickup truck for departure. Have you worked in dangerous areas before? I've covered conflicts in several regions where personal security was a constant concern, Sarah replied, sticking to her cover story. You learn to prepare for various contingencies when your safety depends on being self-sufficient. The drive to Mae Hong Son took most of the afternoon, following mountain roads that wound through increasingly remote terrain. Elena used the time to brief Sarah on local customs and provide background about the people they would encounter. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, covering everything from tribal politics to seasonal flooding patterns that affected travel routes. The man who will guide us across the border is named Aitun Win, Elena explained as they approached their destination. He's been helping medical workers and refugees for years, but he's also involved in smuggling operations. As long as we pay his fees and don't interfere with his other business, he'll get us where we need to go safely. Sarah made mental notes about the complex relationships that governed life in border regions. Everyone seemed to wear multiple hats, serving as legitimate business people, humanitarian workers, and criminals depending on circumstances and opportunities. Understanding these relationships would be crucial for navigating the social landscape around Kozlov's compound. Mae Hong Son was a small city that served as a hub for legitimate trade and illicit smuggling between Thailand and Myanmar. The streets were filled with merchants, refugees, and various types of travelers whose true purposes weren't always obvious. Elena navigated confidently through markets and residential areas, clearly familiar with the local geography and social dynamics. They met Hitun Win at a small restaurant near the river. He was a compact man in his 50s with weathered hands and alert eyes that missed nothing. His conversation with Elena was conducted in a mixture of Thai, Burmese, and English, discussing routes, timing, and payment arrangements for their border crossing. The military situation has changed since last month, Hitun Win told them in accented English. There are more patrols along the main river routes, so we will need to use secondary channels that are more difficult, but safer from official attention. This was both good and bad news for Sarah's mission. Increased military activity meant higher overall security risks, but it also suggested that something significant was happening in the region that might be related to the missing team's operation. As evening approached, Elena and Sarah checked into a small guest house near the river. Elena spent time organizing medical supplies and reviewing patient records from previous visits to villages they planned to reach. Sarah used the privacy of her room to conduct final equipment checks and review satellite photos of the target area. The weight of the mission was beginning to settle on her shoulders. In less than 12 hours, she would be crossing into hostile territory with limited support and extremely ambitious objectives. Success would require not only her own skills and experience, but also careful navigation of local politics and relationships that could change without warning, looking out her window at the dark river that would soon carry them into Myanmar. Sarah thought about Chen and his team. They had been missing for 19 days now, and each additional day reduced the chances that they were still alive. But if they were alive, they were probably wondering if anyone was coming for them. Tomorrow night they would have their answer. The journey across the border began at midnight, when Toon Win's boat slipped quietly away from the Thai riverbank and disappeared into the maze of channels that wound through dense jungle toward Myanmar. Sarah crouched in the bottom of the narrow wooden boat, surrounded by medical supplies and journalism equipment that concealed her real mission gear. Elena sat calmly beside her, apparently accustomed to these clandestine border crossings. The boat's engine was muffled to reduce noise, and Hitun Win navigated by memory through waterways barely wide enough for the vessel. Occasionally he would kill the engine entirely and use a long pole to push them through shallow areas or around obstacles. The jungle pressed in from both sides, creating a tunnel of vegetation that blocked out most of the moonlight. Border patrol boats used the main channels. Tun Win whispered during one of their silent drifting periods, but they cannot follow us through here. Too shallow, too many fallen trees. After 3 hours of careful navigation, they reached a small village on the Myanmar side where Elena was clearly expected. Several villagers emerged from huts to help unload medical supplies, greeting Elena warmly in their local language. Sarah noticed that the villagers were armed with a mixture of old military rifles and hunting weapons, suggesting that this was more than just a simple farming community. "This is where we establish our base of operations," Elena explained as they were led to a large hut that served as both meeting hall and medical clinic. "From here we can reach several villages where I have ongoing medical programs. Your research locations are within a day's travel." Sarah spent the rest of the night organizing her equipment and studying detailed maps of the region around Kozlov's compound. The satellite photos showed that the criminal base was located in a valley surrounded by hills, with only a few approach routes that wouldn't expose infiltrators to observation from guard towers. The compound itself appeared to be built around an old military outpost, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls and defensive positions. Dawn brought the sounds of village life and the opportunity to observe the local security situation. Sarah noticed that the villagers maintained constant watches on approach routes, and that several young men carried military-style radios in addition to their weapons. This was clearly a community that had learned to protect itself in a dangerous region. Elena began her medical work immediately, treating everything from infected wounds to childhood diseases. Sarah used her cover as a journalist to interview villagers about their experiences with human rights violations, gradually building a picture of criminal activities in the surrounding area. "The Russians at the compound take people sometimes," one elderly woman told her through Elena's translation. "Young people who speak languages or have education. They pay money to families, but the people never come back." This confirmed intelligence about forced labor and human trafficking operations, but it also provided Sarah with crucial information about the compound's personnel needs. If Kozlov's organization was actively recruiting local people with specific skills, it suggested that they were running sophisticated operations that required diverse capabilities. A young man named Thant approached Sarah during the afternoon, speaking better English than most of the other villagers. He had served as a government soldier before deserting and returning to his home village, and his military experience made him valuable for understanding the tactical situation in the region. "You want to know about the Russian compound?" he said quietly. Having clearly figured out that her journalistic interests were more specific than she had initially indicated, "I can show you places where you can observe without being seen, but it is dangerous. They have many guards and electronic equipment for detecting intruders." Sarah recognized an opportunity to gather critical intelligence. What kind of electronic equipment? Motion sensors on the approach routes, cameras at key positions, communication systems that monitor radio frequencies. Thant's knowledge was impressive for a local villager. "I know this because I helped install some of it before I understood what kind of people they were." This was exactly the type of information Sarah needed for planning her infiltration. "Would you be willing to guide me to an observation position?" Thant considered the request carefully. "Dr. Elena has helped many people in this village. If you are truly working to stop human trafficking, I will help. But you must understand that if we are caught, they will kill us both." Elena approached as they were concluding their conversation. "Maria, some of the villagers have agreed to take you to areas where trafficking victims have been seen. They're willing to share their stories, but they want to meet at locations where they feel safe." This provided perfect cover for Sarah's reconnaissance mission. "That would be extremely helpful for my research. When can we arrange these meetings?" "Tomorrow morning." "Thant has volunteered to guide you to a village about 15 kilometers from here where several families have lost members to trafficking operations." Elena seemed pleased with the villagers' willingness to cooperate. "You'll need to travel light and be prepared for difficult terrain." Sarah spent the evening carefully selecting equipment for the reconnaissance mission. She needed surveillance gear, weapons for self-defense, and communication equipment to stay in contact with Elena, all disguised as journalism supplies. The compact assault rifle would have to stay behind, but she could carry the silenced pistol and sufficient ammunition for emergency situations. Thant proved to be an excellent guide, leading Sarah through jungle paths that avoided main travel routes while providing good concealment from observation. His military experience was evident in the way he chose routes and maintained security during movement. They reached a ridgeline that overlooked the valley containing Kozlov's compound just after sunrise. The view through Sarah's binoculars revealed a well-organized criminal operation. The compound contained at least 8 buildings, including what appeared to be barracks, storage facilities, and a communication center, identified by its antenna arrays. Guard towers were positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, and Sarah could see armed sentries maintaining regular patrols. "The main building with the red roof is where they keep important prisoners," Thant pointed out. "The storage buildings on the east side contain weapons and equipment for smuggling operations. The communication center monitors all radio traffic in the region." Sarah photographed everything, using a camera with telephoto capabilities that could pass for journalism equipment if examined. The photos would provide crucial intelligence for planning infiltration routes and identifying potential prisoner locations. She also noted vehicle parking areas, fuel storage facilities, and other infrastructure that might be useful for extraction planning. Movement around the compound suggested a force of at least 30 armed guards, with additional personnel working in various support roles. Several vehicles were parked near the main buildings, including trucks suitable for transporting prisoners or stolen equipment. Sarah recognized Russian military vehicles that had probably been obtained through black market channels. "Do you know anything about schedules? When do they change guards? When do vehicles come and go?" Sarah asked. "Guard changes happen 3 times each day at 6 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 10 at night," Thant replied. "Supply trucks come twice each week, usually on Tuesday and Friday mornings. Prisoner trucks come when there are new captures, but not on regular schedule." This timing information was invaluable for planning infiltration. The guard change periods would provide brief windows when security might be less focused, and knowing the supply schedule could help avoid detection during surveillance operations. They spent most of the day observing the compound from different positions, with Thant guiding Sarah to vantage points that provided views of different areas. By afternoon, Sarah had developed a comprehensive picture of the compound's layout, security procedures, and daily routines. I need to get closer, Sarah told Thant as they prepared to return to the village. Is there a way to approach the compound at night without triggering the motion sensors? Thant looked uncomfortable with the suggestion. There is a path that follows the stream on the north side. The water interferes with some of their electronic equipment, but it is very dangerous, and if you are caught, they will know someone is watching them. Sarah understood the risks, but she needed detailed intelligence about the interior of the compound to plan a successful rescue operation. Show me the route and I'll decide whether the risk is acceptable. As they made their way back toward the village, Sarah's mind was already working on infiltration plans. The compound was well defended but not impregnable. The stream approach might provide access to the prisoner building if she could avoid detection long enough to locate Chen's team. But she was beginning to understand that this mission would require more than just locating the prisoners. The compound contained valuable intelligence about criminal operations throughout the region, and Kozlov himself might have information about who had stolen the military technology and how it was being distributed. Elena was waiting anxiously when they returned to the village that evening. How did your research go? Were you able to gather useful information? Very useful, Sarah replied, already planning her next moves. I think I've identified some specific locations where intervention might be possible, but I'll need to conduct some additional investigation before I can recommend specific actions. That night, as Sarah prepared her equipment for what she knew would be a dangerous reconnaissance mission, she thought about the complexity of the situation she was facing. Chen's team was probably being held in the red-roofed building, but rescuing them would require neutralizing 30 armed guards and navigating sophisticated security systems. The stolen military technology was probably stored in one of the compound's secure buildings, adding another objective to an already complicated mission. And Viktor Kozlov himself represented a valuable intelligence target who might have information about other criminal operations and the source of the stolen technology. Sarah had conducted difficult solo operations before, but this mission was pushing the boundaries of what one person could reasonably accomplish. Success would require perfect timing, careful planning, and probably a significant amount of luck. But Chen and his team were counting on her, and the security implications of the stolen technology made failure unacceptable. Tomorrow night, she would find out whether her years of training and experience would be sufficient for the challenges ahead. Sarah waited until 3 in the morning before beginning her infiltration of Kozlov's compound. The timing was crucial, late enough that most of the guards would be fighting fatigue, but early enough to allow several hours for reconnaissance before dawn. She had left Elena sleeping in the village clinic, telling her that she was conducting an early morning interview with trafficking survivors in a nearby settlement. Thant had guided her to within a kilometer of the compound before returning to the village, leaving Sarah to make the final approach alone. She carried minimal equipment: night vision goggles, surveillance camera, silenced pistol, communication gear, and basic tools for bypassing security systems. Everything was selected for stealth rather than firepower, since her mission was intelligence gathering rather than direct assault. The stream approach that Thant had described proved to be even more challenging than expected. The water was deeper than it appeared from a distance, reaching nearly to her waist in some sections, and the current was strong enough to require constant effort to maintain position. But the sound of flowing water did seem to mask small noises, and the vegetation along the banks provided excellent concealment. Sarah moved slowly through the water, pausing frequently to listen for sounds that might indicate guard patrols or electronic surveillance. The night vision goggles revealed a landscape of dense vegetation, broken by clearings where motion sensors were positioned to detect intruders. Thant's information about the sensor locations was accurate, allowing her to plot a route that avoided their detection zones. As she approached the compound's perimeter, Sarah could see the guard towers more clearly. Each was manned by 2 sentries armed with assault rifles and equipped with night vision equipment of their own. They seemed alert but not particularly concerned about threats from the stream side, probably because the difficult terrain made it seem unlikely that attackers would approach from that direction. The perimeter fence was substantial but not insurmountable. 3 meters of chain link topped with razor wire, with electronic sensors that would trigger alarms if the fence was cut or climbed. But Sarah had noticed during her earlier observation that the fence didn't extend into the stream itself, probably because the builders had assumed the water would serve as a natural barrier. Moving carefully along the stream bank, Sarah found a point where the water flow had eroded the ground beneath the fence, creating a gap just large enough for a person to crawl through. The space was narrow and partially submerged, but it offered access to the compound without triggering electronic sensors. Once inside the perimeter, Sarah had to cross open ground to reach the buildings where prisoners might be held. The red-roofed building that Thant had identified was about 50 meters from the fence, across a courtyard that was illuminated by security lights and covered by cameras mounted on nearby structures. Sarah studied the camera positions and guard patrol routes for nearly an hour, timing their movements and identifying blind spots in their coverage. The security was professional but not perfect. There were brief windows when someone moving carefully could cross the courtyard without being detected. The first building she reached appeared to be a barracks for the guards. Through windows, she could see sleeping quarters filled with bunk beds and personal equipment. Several guards were awake, playing cards and talking quietly in what sounded like Russian. Their weapons were nearby but not immediately ready for combat, suggesting they weren't expecting trouble. Moving around the building's perimeter, Sarah located ventilation grates that would allow her to listen to conversations inside. Most of what she heard was casual talk about schedules and complaints about working conditions. But one guard mentioned something about the Americans in Building 3 and Kozlov's questions about military technology. Building 3 was the red-roofed structure, where Thant believed important prisoners were held. Sarah made her way carefully across another section of courtyard, using shadows and timing her movement to avoid camera coverage. The building was larger than the barracks, with reinforced doors and windows that had been modified with security glass and metal bars. Approaching the building from the rear, Sarah found a ventilation grate that provided access to voices from inside. She could hear at least two people talking in English, their voices weak but recognizable. One of them was definitely Captain Chen, discussing something about maintaining operational security and protecting classified information. The conversation suggested that Chen's team was alive, but probably being interrogated about their mission. Sarah photographed the building's exterior, noting security features and potential entry points. The doors were clearly reinforced and probably alarmed, but there were windows on the second floor that might be accessible from the roof of an adjacent storage building. However, any rescue attempt would require neutralizing the guards and dealing with electronic security systems. As she prepared to move to her next target, the communications building, Sarah heard vehicles approaching the compound's main gate. Two trucks with covered cargo areas were being admitted by guards who seemed to be expecting them. Sarah positioned herself to observe as the trucks parked near the storage buildings and began unloading cargo. The cargo appeared to be a mixture of weapons, electronic equipment, and what looked like military-grade communications gear. Some of the equipment cases bore markings that Sarah recognized as American military property designations. This was probably some of the stolen technology that Chen's team had been tracking. Viktor Kozlov himself emerged from the main building to inspect the cargo. He was a large man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Sarah photographed him examining various pieces of equipment while speaking with the truck drivers in Russian. The conversation seemed focused on delivery schedules and payment arrangements. One piece of equipment caught Sarah's particular attention: a metal case about the size of a briefcase, handled with unusual care, and stored separately from the other cargo. Kozlov personally supervised its movement into the main building, suggesting it contained something especially valuable or sensitive. Sarah spent another hour observing the compound's operations, building a detailed picture of security procedures, personnel schedules, and the location of high-value targets. Chen's team was definitely being held in Building 3. The stolen technology was stored in various locations around the compound, and Kozlov himself operated from the main administrative building. But the complexity of the security arrangements was daunting. 30 armed guards, electronic surveillance systems, reinforced buildings, and the remote location all combined to make a solo rescue operation extremely difficult. Sarah began to realize that she might need to modify her mission parameters. As dawn approached, Sarah began her careful withdrawal from the compound. The return journey through the stream was even more challenging, as increasing daylight made concealment more difficult, and the guards seemed more alert during their morning shift change. She reached the village as Elena was beginning her morning medical rounds. How did your early interview go? Elena asked, noting Sarah's wet clothing and exhausted appearance. Very informative. The people I spoke with provided detailed information about trafficking operations in the area. Sarah was already planning her next moves. I think I have enough material to write a comprehensive report, but I may need to conduct some additional verification of facts. Elena seemed pleased with the progress. I'm glad the villagers trusted you enough to share their experiences. That kind of trust takes time to build in this region. Sarah spent the day reviewing her reconnaissance information and developing multiple action plans. The intelligence she had gathered confirmed that Chen's team was alive but probably under significant duress. The stolen technology was present at the compound, but distributed among several locations. And Kozlov himself was actively involved in operations that probably extended far beyond the immediate region. A direct rescue attempt would require more resources than Sarah could provide alone, but there might be other approaches that could achieve some of the mission objectives while creating opportunities for extraction. Sarah began to consider plans that involved creating diversions, exploiting the compound's communication systems, and possibly turning some of the criminal organization's activities against itself. Thant approached her that evening with additional information. I spoke with people from other villages today. They say the Russians are planning to move some of their important prisoners soon, probably to a different location where questioning will be more intensive. This created a deadline pressure that changed Sarah's strategic calculations. If Chen's team was moved to another location, finding them again might be impossible. Any rescue operation would need to happen within the next few days before the transfer could take place. Sarah realized she was facing a decision point that would determine not only the success of her mission, but possibly the survival of Chen's team. She could attempt a direct assault on the compound, knowing that her chances of success were low but that time was running out. Or she could try a more sophisticated approach that might take longer, but offer better prospects for achieving all of her objectives. Looking at the map spread across her sleeping area, Sarah began to formulate a plan that was audacious even by special operations standards. It would require precise timing, significant risk-taking, and probably some luck, but it might be the only way to save Chen's team and complete her mission. Tomorrow night, she would find out whether years of training and experience could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's plan required resources she couldn't obtain alone, which meant bringing Elena and the villagers into an operation that was far more dangerous than medical work or journalism. As she studied the compound layout one final time, she realized that success would depend on creating multiple diversions simultaneously while exploiting the criminal organization's own activities. Against them, the key insight had come from observing Kozlov's communication procedures. The compound maintained radio contact with other criminal operations throughout the region, coordinating smuggling activities and sharing intelligence about law enforcement threats. If Sarah could compromise their communications while creating the appearance of a coordinated attack from multiple directions, she might be able to rescue Chen's team during the resulting confusion. Elena, I need to tell you something important about my real purpose here, Sarah said as they sat in the village clinic the next morning. I'm not actually a journalist investigating human rights violations. Elena looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. I suspected as much. Your equipment and knowledge about security procedures seemed quite advanced for journalism work. Sarah appreciated Elena's directness. I'm working to rescue 4 Americans who are being held prisoner at the Russian compound. They're military personnel who were captured while investigating stolen military technology that poses a threat to national security. And you want to involve our village in a military operation? Elena said, her tone neutral but wary. That could put everyone here at serious risk if something goes wrong. I understand the risks, and I wouldn't ask for help unless the situation was desperate. But the prisoners will be moved to another location within the next few days, and this may be our only chance to save them. Sarah showed Elena the photographs she had taken during her reconnaissance. The operation I'm planning would provide significant benefits to the village by disrupting the criminal activities that threaten this entire region. Elena studied the photos carefully, paying particular attention to the images of stolen military equipment. What exactly are you asking us to do? Sarah outlined her plan, which involved the villagers creating diversions at multiple locations around the compound while she infiltrated the prisoner building. The diversions would be designed to look like coordinated attacks by rival criminal organizations or military forces, causing the guards to respond to perceived threats from several directions simultaneously. Thant and several other men would create explosions and gunfire at positions around the compound's perimeter, making it appear that a large force was attempting to infiltrate from multiple directions. Sarah explained. The guards would respond by reinforcing the perimeter and sending rapid response teams to investigate the apparent threats. Meanwhile, Sarah would use the confusion to penetrate the compound's interior, locate Chen's team, and guide them to a predetermined extraction point. The villagers would maintain their diversionary activities long enough for the prisoners to escape, then withdraw to predetermined safe positions. What about the stolen technology you mentioned? Elena asked. Wouldn't leaving it behind allow these criminals to continue threatening people? Sarah had considered this problem extensively. That's where the second phase of the operation comes in. Once the prisoners are safely away from the compound, we would use the communications equipment I brought to contact American forces and guide them to the location of the stolen technology. Elena was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of involvement. If we do this, what guarantees do we have that American forces will actually respond to help us? And what happens to our village if the Russians survive your operation and want revenge? These were exactly the questions Sarah had expected, and they didn't have easy answers. I can't guarantee that official American support will arrive quickly enough to protect the village from retaliation. But I can tell you that leaving these criminals in operation will eventually threaten everyone in this region. Thant had been listening to their conversation from across the clinic. Dr. Elena, these Russians have taken people from many villages, not just ours. They grow stronger every month, and the government cannot or will not stop them. Maybe this is our chance to fight back. Other villagers had gathered as word spread about the discussion. Sarah found herself facing a group of people who had lived with the threat of criminal violence for years, weighing the risks of action against the certainty of continued victimization if they did nothing. An elderly man who seemed to be a village leader spoke in the local language to Elena, who translated for Sarah. He says the village council will need to vote on whether to help you. They want to know more details about what would be required from our people. Sarah spent the rest of the day answering questions and explaining operational details to villagers who had more military experience than she had initially realized. Several of the men had served in government forces or ethnic militias, and their tactical knowledge was impressive. They understood the risks involved, but also recognized the strategic importance of disrupting criminal operations in their region. The village council met that evening to debate the proposal. Sarah was asked to wait outside while they discussed the implications of involvement in what was essentially a military operation. Elena served as her advocate, explaining the medical and humanitarian benefits that might result from successful disruption of human trafficking operations. When the council reached their decision, the village leader addressed Sarah directly through Elena's translation. They have agreed to help, but with conditions. The operation must be conducted in a way that gives the village plausible deniability, if questioned by authorities. And you must guarantee that if American forces respond to your call for help, they will also provide protection for the village against retaliation. Sarah could promise to request protection, but she couldn't guarantee that her superiors would approve it. I will do everything in my power to ensure that American forces provide protection and support for this village. Your assistance in rescuing American military personnel and recovering stolen technology will be documented and reported to the highest levels of government. Preparations began immediately. Thant organized teams of villagers to prepare diversionary devices using agricultural explosives and hunting equipment. Elena gathered medical supplies that would be needed to treat potentially injured prisoners. Sarah tested her communication equipment and reviewed extraction routes that would take the rescue party to the helicopter landing zone. The operation was scheduled for the following night, when weather conditions would provide additional concealment, and the compound's guard schedule would be most predictable. Sarah spent the intervening time conducting final reconnaissance and coordinating timing with the village teams. As the sun set on what might be her last day of preparation, Sarah reflected on how much the mission had evolved from her original briefing. What had begun as a solo infiltration operation had become a collaborative effort involving civilian volunteers who had their own compelling reasons for wanting to disrupt Kozlov's criminal organization. Elena approached her as she conducted final equipment checks. Maria, or whatever your real name is, I want you to know that this village has been waiting for someone like you for years. We've seen too many people disappear, too many families destroyed by these criminals. Even if your operation doesn't succeed completely, the attempt will mean something important to people who have felt helpless for too long. Sarah was moved by Elena's words, but also sobered by the responsibility they represented. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I promise you that we will do everything possible to make this mission successful. Chen's team has been waiting for rescue for 21 days, and they deserve to go home to their families. As darkness fell over the village, Sarah made final preparations for an operation that would either save 4 American lives and recover critical military technology, or result in casualties that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The villagers who had volunteered to help were saying goodbye to their families, knowing that some of them might not return from the night's activities. But for the first time since arriving in Southeast Asia, Sarah felt that she had sufficient resources and local support to give the mission a realistic chance of success. Chen's team had been counting on someone to come for them, and tomorrow they would discover whether their faith had been justified. The assault on Kozlov's compound would begin in less than 6 hours. The operation began at exactly 11 o'clock that night, when the first explosions erupted along the eastern perimeter of Kozlov's compound. Thunt and his team had positioned improvised explosive devices at 3 locations, creating the impression of a coordinated assault by a substantial force. The blasts were followed immediately by sustained gunfire from multiple positions, designed to suggest that attackers were attempting to breach the compound's defenses. Sarah watched from her concealed position near the stream as the compound's guards responded exactly as she had predicted. Emergency lights illuminated the entire facility, while armed teams rushed toward the apparent threats on the perimeter. Radio chatter filled the airwaves as commanders attempted to coordinate their response to what appeared to be a multi-directional attack. The diversionary tactics were working perfectly. Guard towers that normally maintained watch over the entire compound were now focused on specific threat directions, creating blind spots in their surveillance coverage. Sarah began her approach through the stream, moving quickly while the defenders were distracted by apparent attacks elsewhere. Penetrating the compound's interior was easier this time, since many of the guards who normally patrolled the courtyard areas had been deployed to reinforce the perimeter. Sarah reached the prisoner building without encountering resistance, though she could hear frantic radio communications as Kozlov's men tried to determine the size and intentions of the attacking force. The building's security had been reduced to 2 guards, both of whom were positioned to watch the main entrance rather than potential infiltration routes. Sarah approached from the rear, using the same route she had surveyed during her reconnaissance mission. The rear entrance was secured with electronic locks that required several minutes to bypass, but her training in technical infiltration proved sufficient. Inside the building, Sarah found Chen's team being held in a reinforced room on the 2nd floor. All 4 men were alive but showed signs of interrogation and poor treatment. Captain Chen was alert enough to recognize her immediately, though he seemed surprised to see a single rescuer rather than a full assault team. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing here?" Chen whispered as Sarah cut his restraints with a tactical knife. "Please tell me you brought backup." "It's complicated, but yes, I have local support providing diversions outside. We need to move quickly while their attention is focused elsewhere." Sarah began freeing the other team members, assessing their physical condition and ability to travel. 2 of the men were injured but mobile, while the 3rd was weak from what appeared to be systematic maltreatment during interrogation. Chen himself was in the best condition, having apparently resisted his captors' attempts to extract information about their mission. "The technology they were after is stored in the main building," Chen reported as they prepared to leave the prisoner area. "Kozlov has been trying to get us to explain how it works, but we've maintained operational security." Sarah had hoped to locate and recover the stolen technology, but the sounds of ongoing combat outside suggested that their window of opportunity for escape was limited. "Our primary objective is getting you out alive. The technology recovery will have to be a secondary mission." Moving through the building toward their exit route, Sarah could hear increased radio traffic indicating that Kozlov's forces were beginning to realize that the perimeter attacks might be diversions rather than serious assault attempts. Several teams were being recalled from the perimeter to conduct internal security sweeps. "Contact left," Chen warned as they approached the building's rear exit. 3 guards were moving across the courtyard in their direction, probably responding to reports of security breaches in the prisoner area. Sarah engaged the guards with her silenced pistol, eliminating 2 before they could raise an alarm. The 3rd guard managed to activate his radio before Chen neutralized him with a weapon taken from one of his companions. But the brief radio transmission had been enough to alert compound security that intruders were operating inside the perimeter. Emergency. Sirens began wailing throughout the compound as additional security teams converged on their location. Sarah led Chen's team toward the stream extraction route, but it quickly became apparent that their original escape plan was no longer viable. Too many guards were now aware of their presence and actively searching for them. Alternative extraction point, Sarah decided, changing direction toward a section of the compound's perimeter where Thant had positioned one of his diversionary teams. If they could reach that location, the villagers might be able to provide covering fire for their escape. The journey across the compound became a running firefight as they encountered multiple security teams. Chen and his men performed effectively despite their weakened condition, using captured weapons and tactical experience to help fight their way toward the perimeter. But the opposition was growing stronger as more guards were recalled from other positions. Reaching the perimeter fence, Sarah activated her radio to contact Thant's team. "Extraction point Bravo. We need immediate covering fire for 4 additional personnel." Thant's response was immediate and reassuring. "We see you. Covering fire in 30 seconds. Be ready to move when shooting starts." The villagers opened fire on the guard towers and security teams pursuing Sarah's group, creating enough confusion and suppression to allow them to breach the perimeter fence and escape into the jungle. But the sound of vehicles starting up inside the compound indicated that pursuit would follow quickly. "They'll use trucks and helicopters to track us," Chen warned as they moved through dense vegetation toward the primary extraction point. "We need to reach that landing zone before they can organize an effective search." Sarah activated her satellite communication device and transmitted the emergency extraction code that would summon American helicopter support. But the nearest aircraft was based across the border in Thailand, and it would take at least 40 minutes to reach their location. The next hour became a desperate race through jungle terrain, with Kozlov's forces using vehicles and aircraft to search for the escaped prisoners. The sound of helicopters overhead forced the group to seek concealment repeatedly, slowing their progress toward the extraction point where American support would eventually arrive. Chen's weakest team member was struggling to maintain the pace required for escape, forcing the group to make difficult decisions about movement techniques and rest stops. Sarah found herself carrying additional equipment while helping to support the injured man, drawing on reserves of strength and endurance that she hadn't needed to access in years. "Aircraft approaching from the south," Thant reported over the radio. He had positioned himself at an observation point where he could monitor both friendly and hostile air activity. "Looks like your people, but the Russians are close behind." The American helicopter appeared at the extraction point exactly on schedule, piloted by crew members who were clearly experienced in combat rescue operations. But Kozlov's forces had also located the landing zone and were moving to intercept the rescue operation. What followed was a brief but intense firefight as the helicopter crew provided covering fire, while Sarah and Chen's team ran across open ground to reach the aircraft. Several of Kozlov's men were positioned to prevent the rescue, but the superior firepower and training of the American forces proved decisive. As the helicopter lifted off with all personnel aboard, Sarah could see vehicles converging on the landing zone from multiple directions. The rescue had succeeded, but barely, and probably only because of the diversionary tactics provided by Thant and the villagers. "Martinez, I don't know how you managed to organize a rescue operation with local assets, but you probably saved our lives," Chen said as the helicopter flew toward safety across the Thai border. "Command is going to want a full debrief on everything. That happened here." Sarah was already thinking about the intelligence, reports she would need to write, and the recommendations she would make about follow-up operations. The stolen technology was still in Kozlov's possession, and the criminal organization remained a threat to regional security. But Chen's team was safe, and the information they had gathered during their captivity would be valuable for future operations. More importantly, The village that had risked everything to help with the rescue operation would need protection from retaliation. Sarah intended to ensure that American forces provided adequate support for people who had demonstrated extraordinary courage in helping to rescue American military personnel. As the helicopter crossed into Thai airspace, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in the past week. She had returned to military operations after 5 years of civilian consulting, led a complex rescue mission with minimal official support, and forged relationships with local allies who had proven their dedication to opposing criminal violence in their region. The mission was complete, but Sarah suspected that her involvement with Southeast Asian operations was far from over. Kozlov's organization still possessed stolen American military technology, and the regional security situation remained unstable. There would probably be additional missions, additional opportunities to use her skills in service of national security interests. But for now, Chen and his team were safe, heading home to families who had wondered if they would ever see their loved ones again. That achievement alone made all the risks and complications worthwhile. The helicopter continued its flight toward Bangkok, carrying 4 rescued Americans and 1 consultant who had discovered that retirement from military service didn't necessarily mean retirement from military responsibilities. Some commitments, Sarah realized, lasted far longer than official service obligations. In the distance behind them, the jungle concealed both ongoing criminal operations and villages full of people who had learned that sometimes help could come from the most unexpected sources. The balance of power in the region had shifted, even if only slightly, in favor of those who opposed criminal violence and exploitation. And somewhere in that jungle, Elena was continuing her medical work, knowing that the risks she and her village had taken had made a real difference in the lives of people who needed help. The operation was over, but the relationships and commitments it had created would endure long after the official reports were filed and classified.